Hi there, welcome to Prepare Me to be a Sanctuary, Trauma-Informed Teaching Practices. My name is Leah Acri. I teach third grade in Detroit, Michigan.
My name is Matt Staley, and I teach third grade in Indianapolis.
My name is Owen Camas, and I teach third grade in San Jose, California.
And my name is Meg Murphy, and I teach fourth grade in Washington, D.C.
Okay, to get us started, we're just going to go through our agenda for our presentation. We're going to start by going over what ACEs are and why they're important. We're going to move into how these ACEs might be seen in a school. We're going to go through what interventions we can use as teachers to help students who are going through trauma. And then lastly, we're going to talk about why it's important for us as ACE teachers to deal with trauma and employ these practices. So to get started, we just have a discussion of what an ACE is. Typically, when we discuss trauma in a classroom context, we use the term ACE to kind of describe the situation and contextualize it a little bit. So an ACE is an adverse childhood experience, and adverse childhood experiences are potentially traumatic experiences that might occur during childhood. They can undermine a child's sense of safety, stability, and bonding. So it can have both internal effects and can also affect how a child kind of relates to others in the world around them. ACEs can also be related to a direct experience that a child has, but it also might be linked to environmental factors. So it could be someone living in an under-resourced or racially segregated neighborhood. It could also be linked to things like generational trauma. According to CDC research, 61% of adults report experiencing one ACE during childhood, and more than 1 in 5 adults report experiencing 3 or more ACEs during childhood. Generally speaking, more ACEs lead to worse health outcomes. So on this next slide, we have an infographic of some common ACEs. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it does go through a lot of prevalent examples of ACEs that you might encounter. So it could be different forms of abuse, physical or emotional neglect, and then also forms of household dysfunction, be it incarceration or divorce. 2 things to note that are missing from the infographic. 1, we're still waiting for research on the effects of COVID-19. We assume it's going to be another factor that might lead to ACEs, but we're still waiting for the research and the literature to catch up on that fact. Then the other thing is the environmental factors, which we noted, like living through poverty or prejudice, can also be ACEs, but they're not found on this graphic. And the last part we want to go over here is just the impact of ACEs. The biggest one to note is that ACEs may cause toxic stress, which is an excessive activation of the stress response system, and that can have both immediate and long-term health effects. So in the immediate term, children struggling with trauma may struggle with emotional regulation, metacognition, and executive function. We're going to go into more about how that might be seen in the classroom in just a moment. And then kind of in the longer run, ACEs have also been linked to poor long-term health outcomes. So it can be chronic health problems and also things like the increased likelihood of substance abuse. The thing to keep in mind when discussing all of this is that research shows that positive interventions from caregivers can counteract these negative impacts. So it really underscores the importance of these trauma-informed practices, because through these practices and interventions, we can help students navigate and work through their trauma, which will then have long-term health benefits.
Next, we'll be talking about how this trauma can present itself within our classrooms. So according to the Institute of Educational Sciences, we can split up the way trauma presents itself into 5 overarching themes: physical symptoms, cognitive symptoms, emotional symptoms, language and communication symptoms, and learning symptoms. So as Owen said, there's a lot of effects on the child when they experience these traumas through ACEs. And not only does that affect their physical health, but it also relates to their academic and behavioral development as well. And we see that as their teachers within the classroom. So obviously we know as teachers, what they experience at home comes into the classroom every single day. So it's really important to keep an eye out for these signs as their educators. So to start off with the physical symptoms, this can look like increased somatic complaints like my head hurts, my stomach hurts, hyperactivity or withdrawal from others. Hyperactivity could be fidgeting or kind of numbness to others' interactions. Cognitive symptoms could be recreating the traumatic event, worrying about their safety or the safety of those around them, and disassociation. Emotional symptoms could be rapid emotional changes, going really angry to really happy, poor regulation of those emotions when they are changing, and the numbness that we spoke about earlier, but more related to emotional numbness. Relating to the language and communication symptoms, this could be present in language delays in early childhood, or even getting up to upper elementary if they are struggling to communicate their emotions. That could be a symptom of the trauma that they've experienced. They could also have nonverbal challenges. So being able to communicate nonverbally, if that is difficult, that could be a sign. And negative language, really using negative language towards themselves or others. And lastly, their learning symptoms would be absenteeism. If they just are not showing up, that could be a sign that something is wrong. Executive function challenges, as we noted earlier, and transfer challenges. If they aren't able to take what they're learning in one subject and apply that across the board in more extreme ways, then that could be also a sign that they are struggling. So as their educators, it's important to know these signs and to be vigilant for these signs within our classrooms, because one student presenting trauma could be very different from the next student. So we need to be aware of all the different signs and be sure to use the applications that we'll talk about in a moment to kind of mitigate the effects.
So now we're going to talk about interventions or applications that you as a teacher can take in the classroom. As my partners outlined, ACEs are extremely impactful, mostly in negative ways, and as teachers, we see that in the classroom. In many cases, students who experience one or more ACEs often don't have strong supports at home, so it is detrimental that we provide that support in the classroom, especially for how many hours we spend with our kids each day. So the first intervention that we can take is a model called the sanctuary model. And this model is essentially just creating a safe and healthy environment in the classroom. This looks different for each teacher in each classroom, but there are some things overall that you can do to create that healthy classroom. First and foremost, get to know your students. If they see you at the beginning of every day and feel safe going into your classroom, then you can go with the rest of your day creating a positive environment. Other ways that you can do that is having, depends on your grade level, but community circles to emphasize classroom culture and belonging, as well as just providing positive, like words of advice or anything like that to kind of just welcome them into your classroom. The sanctuary model, I'll talk about it in a little bit, but it provides many different commitments that you can take as a teacher to have a nonviolent classroom, a classroom that welcomes emotions, as well as helping students regulate them, as well as many other things that you can do. The second intervention that you can take as their educator is be emotional support for them. Again, welcoming those emotions, but also helping them regulate them. This can look very different for each classroom, but helping your students really just go through their emotions, positive or negative emotions, is very important, and we can see their emotions and then help them regulate them. And when I say regulate, examples could be offering a reflection worksheet on their emotions, giving them the space to not only think about their emotions, reflect on them, but write them out so that you as their teacher can see what emotions they are experiencing and what you can do to support them. Again, a huge emphasis on getting to know your students, because once you get to know your students, you know how they act. You know how they interact with others, with yourself, with the content, and beyond. So just getting to know your students and their emotions is one of the best ways that you can support them, especially if they are experiencing some really challenging emotions with one of these or more ACEs. A third intervention that you can take is teacher language. And this encompasses more than just what you say in the classroom, but how you make them feel. So with that, it is important that you use inclusive language and words. And that could look different in many different facets, but one is using positive attention and reinforcement to your students. If you are negative, then that causes another train of emotional support issues and things like that. But through teacher language, again, you can welcome them into that classroom, create that positive culture, and help them go through or help them experience their ACEs in a much more positive way. So positive attention could look like just giving words of kindness, reinforcing them, letting them know that they are loved in the classroom and supported in their academics. This could be a, good job, you're doing amazing, or one of the articles revealed to us that a great way to do this is to set a timer every few minutes to compliment one of your students. Again, building that positive teacher language in the classroom. And then the last intervention that I'll talk about right now is physical space. Changing your classroom to let them know that it is a safe place to be. This could look different in many ways. One way could be how you set up your classroom with your desks. Where are the students sitting? Where are you? Where are you in that physical space? Are you going to be distant, just sitting at your desk, not interacting with them? Or are you going to circulate around the room, helping them go through these emotions, learning the content, building relationships with others? And I wanted to dive a little deeper into the sanctuary model. The sanctuary model, again, emphasizes a safe and healthy environment. So on this chart, we see the many different commitments that educators must take to go through the sanctuary model. The first one is nonviolence. Many of the ACEs deal with issues at home or in their environment that just have a lot of violence. And so in the classroom, it's really important to have a nonviolent approach and a welcoming approach. The next one is emotional intelligence. Again, not only learning their emotions, but helping them learn their emotions and how to regulate them in the best way possible. Social learning, interactions with others. If we create an environment where we have that belonging and that culture of getting to know one another and building relationships, that's another part of the sanctuary model. Open communication. This kind of goes along with that intervention of teacher language of just being positively communicating with your students. And then social responsibility, welcoming them into the local community of your classroom, your school, or the geographical community that they belong in. Democracy. I know I use this sometimes in my classroom to give them choice for what they wanted to do. And if they have a choice, then they feel safe and that they can go forward in their life knowing that they are not just going to be told what to do based on their experiences. And then growth and change. As teachers, we talk a lot about the growth mindset and just having that part of your classroom, letting them know that, the power of yet, that you may not be able to do something yet, and that can be applied in their academic content or in their relationship building and things of the sort.
So when we look at the implications of our research for ACE teaching fellows, we are going to view the importance of trauma-informed teaching practices in three lenses, which are the three pillars of ACE: community, spirituality, and teaching. So here's why trauma-informed teaching practices are important to our community. And that is because ACE's mission is to ensure that all children, especially children from low-income families, have the resource or can receive the gift of Catholic education. And when it comes to children from low-income families, it's important to note that research has found that children are 74% more likely to experience 3 or more traumatic events than their counterparts. And this study that provided that statistic studied students in kindergarten. So we know that the effects of trauma start very young and can continue throughout a child's entire experience in school. Finally, when it comes to the communities and the schools in which we serve, it's important to note that students of color and children in urban environments are at a higher risk of exposure to trauma. That was something that we found in our research, and we've included our references to if you'd like to look further into that research. Finally, in the community lens, it's important to recognize that we cannot push students who have experienced traumas into the out-group and to other them, because many of our ACE teaching fellows might have grown up in low-income families, and also most of us have experienced trauma ourselves. So trauma-informed practices don't just lift up our classmate or our students community, but also us as well in our community, in the classroom and broader communities. Spirituality, trauma-informed teaching practices are important because we in ACE share gospel values. I referenced Matthew 25, verses 31 to 40, which is when Jesus says, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me." So we believe in our classrooms that when we serve our students, we are serving them and also the presence of Jesus within them. So the drive to serve our students with trauma comes from our experience with our faith and is promoted through Catholic social teaching and the preferential option for the poor. Finally, teaching. We found in our research that good instruction is trauma-informed instruction. So, and the other way around, the children who experience trauma need safe and predictable routines, and we can create those safe and predictable routines for children by focusing on our craft, by implementing guidance that we get from our teacher mentors, from our supervisor, and from other resources that we have in the ACES innovative instructional model. Our access to mentorship in our schools and through the program can guide us in our teaching practice and help us to create trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive environments. Lastly, in our instruction, what is necessary for one, that is what is necessary for a student with trauma to succeed in the classroom, is also good for all. We are not isolating any student or any particular groups of students in our trauma-informed teaching practices, but rather we are building up our entire classroom to a safe, a predictable, and an effective community. So our inclusion and our call to action. To summarize our findings, we have found that 2/3 of children encounter adverse childhood experiences by the age of 16. Trauma impacts children's neurological and social development in class and beyond, which is why it is important to address as teachers. And finally, we found that intervention strategies mitigate trauma's effects in the classroom and beyond. So as Matt had said, there are suggestions and real and actionable steps that you can take in your classroom to respond to students' experience with trauma. We have identified some further research to be done. We learned that there's a lot left to learn of how educators can help and what actionable steps are effective and maybe which steps are not as effective to implement within the classroom. There's a lot of research on that, but there is also a lot of room to grow in that area of research. Finally, as Owen had mentioned, the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic are so new that we know that students who have lived in the present day have been affected by the worldwide pandemic, and we are still looking for ways to see what that looks like in our classrooms. And finally, our call to action. We invite you to go forth and teach along with us. I know that I learned a lot through my research that I'm looking forward to implement in my classroom. And in order to help with that, we have created a Google Doc that provides links for programs like Calm Classroom, which is they provide mindfulness activities. Go Noodle, which is a brain break website that is trauma informed, and the website itself has more articles to look into of how they have curated their resources. The Child Mind Institute and other trauma-informed resources like the Sanctuary Model are included in that Google Doc.
Thank you for listening to our presentation today. I hope that you take these to heart and that you implement them this upcoming year. And we will speak to you at the conference.